Welcome to Flat, Cool, and Acid-Free, an OK State Archives podcast, bringing you stories about Oklahoma State University and Oklahoma. I'm Nina Thornton, multimedia producer for the OSU Libraries. On this episode,
the archives, we have stuff. We've got a lot of stuff. And we try to have a kind of an assembly line of when things come in and a process to keep it moving. But this was decades ago. I was in my infancy at the time, and stuff sometimes piles up. You get just things that didn't get moved. And so we were clearing out an area. This was upstairs on the 5th floor, and there was some stuff stacked in front of a door. And so as we cleared the stuff out in front of the door, I thought, well, what's behind the door?
Now, before we talk about what's behind the door, let's chat about a bit of Oklahoma history. Homesteaders moved into the Great Plains. World War I required an increase in the cultivation of crops. Then came the stock market crash of the 1920s, and by the early 30s, effects of the Depression wasn't the only thing sweeping across the plains. What happened was erosion, but not from water, by wind. For years, the plains had seen ample rain, which new homesteaders thought was the norm, but when it all dried up, the dust came.
What had happened is much of western Oklahoma had been plowed under after being homesteaded, and farmers were encouraged to plow soil over, and especially during World War I, they needed agricultural production, and so they just went crazy out in western Oklahoma, western Texas, southwestern Kansas. That whole region got plowed up. The Soil Conservation Service and other agencies had always thought of soil erosion regarding like streams and water moving soil. Most of that soil was being pulled down from, by rivers and streams. So this was the first really big occasion where the soil is being moved by wind. Once those winds began to churn up and there was nothing holding that soil down, it moved tons and tons of soil. And so it was an amazing and scary, this situation, which was man-made. They didn't purposely set out to do it. They didn't realize, but it was a consequence of man's decisions to grow crops in areas that really were kind of marginal for growing crops, at least the kinds of crops they were growing.
Now, the Agricultural Experiment Station had been formed with the start of Oklahoma A&M, as directed by the Hatch Act of 1887. The goal was to research and experiment with what kinds of agriculture or crops could thrive in the region. These stations were set up all around the state, and by the early 20s, the Panhandle Station was up and running.
A former graduate of Oklahoma A&M, Henry Howard Fennell, he went by H.H. Fennell or Howard Fennell. So Howard goes out to Panhandle and becomes director of the Panhandle Agricultural Experiment Station, I think about 1923, 1924, sometime in early to mid-20s. Well, already then he's seeing that it's just not as wet out there. He was originally from Mississippi, but it's kind of dry out there, and so he begins to look at things like terracing. So when there are rains, to have these terraces to kind of capture that water and let it soak in rather than simply run off. Contour plowing, so you're plowing at the same contours or where the elevations are changing, also to help to kind of control. He was thinking still in terms of water, but that when there was water, trying to capture that as much as possible. So he's trying these techniques and recommending these techniques in the 20s already. Just nobody's thinking why. We don't get that much rain. We don't have a problem with runoff. What's the deal? Well, of course, when the dust start blowing through, and those dust clouds, that starts in Colorado and New Mexico and West Texas, and there is nothing to hold that dust down, in part because there's no moisture and there's no vegetation. Then people start listening to H.H. Fennell. He begins to build on those early experiments and trials that he had established at Goodwill to look at other things that needed to be done. Fennell became really quite significant, and later I think he leaves Panhandle. By the mid-30s, he's been hired by the federal government to coordinate efforts in that whole area, and works. So now he has an impact on thousands of farmers and millions of acres, and it has a tremendous impact on the recovery efforts as they try to resolve some of the issues that have created earlier and figure out how to move forward.
Okay, now here we are back at the beginning of our story, in front of a door, just waiting to be opened.
I thought, well, what's behind the door? And so I open it up, and there's these wooden crates in there, and they're kind of old looking, and they're filthy. They're just filthy. That's probably why they put them in there, to keep them away from all our clean stuff. Oh yeah, put that dusty, dirty stuff, put that in the closet. You know, if they had carpet to put it under, they would have put it under the carpet. Anyway, so they got this. There's just kind of piles of this stuff in there, and it's just filthy. And so I open up one of the boxes, and I look at one of the. At the time I wasn't that familiar with glass lantern slides, and I look at this thing, and I thought, oh, you can look at it and see through it, and I hold it up to the light, and I go, oh, that's kind of an interesting image. And then I look through some more, and then I find a little piece of paperwork. These were from the Soil Conservation Service. And I thought, wow, that is kind of amazing. And apparently they had, from what I understand, is they had been found at the Agriculture Experiment Station and in a barn or a shed or someplace where someone had just stuck them, and probably 40 or 50 or 60 years ago, who knows? Because it looks like they probably had been used for presentations at one point in time. And then, you know, that medium had gone out of favor. They weren't used for presentation anymore. And so someone had just boxed them up and stuck them in a barn or a shed out there. And that's where they languished for decades before somehow they got to the archives at OSU. And but it was one of those serendipitous discovery things. But what was kind of interesting about it too is just a few days earlier, I'd been contacted by one of Ken Burns's people. I think her name was Susan Shoemaker, but they were scouring the country looking for images for the Dust Bowl, and we didn't have a lot. I said, Susan, I'm sorry, I'll you know, but all of a sudden there's this closet, you know, with stuff in it. And so and they ended up using some of those images both in their presentation on OETA on public television and in the book, the complementary book with the series. So actually those images were used by the production, but it was just kind of a combination of discovery, and then realizing that, oh, there's someone who wants to look besides myself. And then I had to figure out how to clean them. And so I spent sort of amount of time trying to archivally clean them properly, so I wasn't scratching the glass, that I wasn't making more damage. We cleaned them up, and then people have been using them since. There's one image that shows an abandoned farm site. It's got part of the house and looks like part of the barn, and a windmill, and I think there's one or two pieces of farm equipment that are kind of half buried. All of this stuff is buried, you know, in inches or feet of dust. And it's just and first of all, it's a good image. The photographer just did an excellent job of capturing and focusing and kind of creating the subject matter in a one snap shot. So they really made an excellent photograph. But to me, you think of probably 10 years earlier, there was a vibrant family living there, you know, living their lives, being productive members of society, and the dreams and hopes they had, and now it's just gone. I mean, they're gone. It's gone. There's nothing left but these scars on the land surface. It's really to me, it just captures a lot in that image, especially if you think about what had been there and what's there now. But then, so that's kind of the impact of the Dust Bowl. But then I've got another one that I really like, It's a guy on a old tractor, and he's cultivating the soil right next to a terrace, and he's going along the contour of the terrace, um, and then on the other side of the terrace is grass, and so you've got a belt way of grass, and then you've got this terrace, and then you've got him plowing an area, and then you can see another belt of grass further down. But they've obviously altered what they did. They've changed their behavior. They want to stay. They want to do it better. They've learned from their mistakes, and now they're you can see kind of optimism again, I think. And there's more of a balance between um, there's more of a relational balance between man and the environment in that second image. In the first image, the relationship between man and environment has been completely destroyed. In the second image, there's a relationship again. They're learning from each other, I think, in a way, that they can collaborate on the production of foods. And without agriculture, all of us would go hungry pretty quick. So it really, the second picture, I guess, captures optimism for me, and change. People can change.
These images and almost 600 other glass lantern slides have been digitized and are available to you online. A link is in the show notes. This episode featured David Peters, head of the OSU Archives, and was produced by Nina Thornton. Theme music is It's a Process, composed by Ben Stone and Finley Green and published by BBC Production Music, PRS. From the folks at Oklahoma State University Libraries and the Archives, thanks for listening. And always remember to keep your archival material flat, cool, and acid-free.